we'll move forward to actually introducing our guest. We're not going to ask you to rap, Fred, um, but I am really excited to have Dr. Fred Provenza on our podcast today with the Noe and Sylvia Hour. We asked Fred if he would just spend some time visiting with us on all things kind of biodiversity. For those of you that are not been in the agency for long, Fred used to teach a course for us through NRCS. The plant herbivore and animal interactions, I think was the name of it. It used to be a 2-week course and then it came to a 1 week. And that's where I got to meet Fred. Gosh, been quite a few years now. And, it was just his messaging was just far deeper than what plants do animals eat and how do they interact. And so we just wanted to really kind of give you guys this kind of holiday treat of bringing him on and really just kind of talking about, just all the different ponderings. So Fred, will let you go ahead and just kind of do a quick introduction to yourself and then we'll, kind of go into some of our questions.
Okay. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here with you and an honor. And Sylvia, it was wonderful when we met back in the day of the 1-week course that the Noble Foundation was hosting. I guess I would say just briefly, I'm originally from Colorado. My heart's never left the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. I love it there. Love to come back and hike. I went to school at Colorado State University in wildlife biology. I was always fascinated by wild creatures. Came to absolutely love plants and plant life and the relationship between plants and animals. During the years I was at Colorado State University, actually from when I was a senior in high school, I started working on a ranch west of Salida, Colorado, at the foothills of Mount Chavanaugh, and spent 7 years total on that ranch and just absolutely loved working on that ranch. I've never felt so grounded and centered in my entire life as those years just working with crops, with animals, goats, sheep, cattle, and so forth. And so I think when I think back to those experiences, probably everything that we'll talk about today is really rooted in those experiences from the ranch days in Colorado State University, and then going on to graduate school and getting wonderful opportunity to work with plants and animals. That's a little bit of background, I think. I'm sure the questions looking at them will allow us to explore a lot more about all of this.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's so great to have someone with the Colorado connection. So go Rams. It's one of the things we'd talked about previously, and something that I know when I go out to fields, I do a lot is I'll go out and visit with a producer and be looking at their range field or their cropland field. And a lot of times if I'm in a rush, I might just look at like our soil health assessment. Or I might just be thinking about, how many tons of soil they're losing. We have all these individual assessments that we do, and I know I can kind of get stuck in this trap of running out to a field, looking at it, doing some assessments, coming back, and I wonder if I'm not maybe missing a bigger picture of what's going on someone's pasture or their crop field. What advice would you have for employees to get a better understanding of, if their land is in harmony, what kind of biodiversity they might have instead of just looking at individual pieces?
I'm going to step back quite a ways to
Sure.
enter into that question, which I think is a fascinating question, actually. Now, go back to when I was in grad school, actually. When I went back to grad school, I was learning all these different things about plants and soils and animals and wild species and on and on and on. I was trying to think about, is there anything that I can organize my thoughts around? Is there anything that you can say that's general across all of those things? And I thought and thought and thought about that. And it finally occurred to me really about the only thing you can say is that things change. The only constant in life is change. They're forever moving. And so when I think of landscapes, I love to think about that notion of change. And there's a book that was written many years ago by a Canadian ecologist, plant ecologist, um, titled After the Ice Age, The Return of Life to Glaciated North America. And she did such a wonderful job of painting that picture of the dynamism. You know, and I'm not saying this is bad or good. You know, we think about native species and what should occur, should be on a particular site, for instance, in rangeland assessments. But she did such a wonderful job of painting how dynamic plants and animals are, how they're moving across these landscapes all the time. If you step back at all, I think as I drive across Colorado nowadays from North Park to Middle Park to South Park and San Luis Valley, all the trees that have died, all the conifer trees dying, dying, dying. Well, she talks about things like that, and as climates change, species come and go and move, and so I always think of that when I think about landscapes at one level. And then I think within our lifetime of the many, many photo records that people have made of landscapes. And they go to the same place year after year after year, and they take photographs, and how valuable those have been for us. I used to show them all the time in classes, 30-year record, same place, and you wouldn't even know you were at the same place. You'd think, oh my gosh. And then they talk about the weather kind of effects, the insect effects, the wildlife effects, all these different factors. And you just think how dynamic these landscapes are. And then I'm thinking now of the NRCS short course that you mentioned, Sylvia. And there were places that we would go. There was a lot of infield component to that class, but there were places we would go. And I'm going to give you one example. There's a game fence that runs all along the eastern boundary of Logan and the foothills and the mountains. They put that game fence in to keep mule deer from coming down into the city way back in the day. It's I don't know, 7-8 foot tall. Must have been a fortune to put that thing in. But it was so interesting to go to that game fence and then look at those foothills where the mule deer wintered, and look above the fence and look below the fence. And they had been doing studies probably for 40 or 50 years on the vegetation change on those foothills, and vegetation change as a function of different kinds of use of those foothills. And so we'd sit there and we'd walk around and look a little bit above the fence. And what do you see here? You know, and it was a good mix of plants. It wasn't like abused landscape above the fence, nor below the fence. But after a while, we'd talk about the grasses and the forbs, and then we'd get to the shrubs. And above the fence, there was a great stand of bitterbrush, no sagebrush. Sagebrush was gone from the stand. Below the fence, there was a great stand of bitterbrush and sagebrush. So we'd wind around to that and say, well, you know how come the difference? Why the difference above and below the fence? And by then we would have talked about some of that in class, and people would say, well, maybe the bitterbrush is serving as an appetizer to help the mule deer eat the sagebrush. The tannins in the bitterbrush are countering the terpenes in the sagebrush, and so they're able to overutilize the sagebrush basically and take it out of the stand. And so what I'm trying to say is it's those kind of dynamics that I think about when I look at a landscape. And that's where I think too, the more intimate a person can be with a landscape and with what's happening on those landscapes, I think it's an amazing thing, and it's amazing blending of the science and art and observation. And I think those skills, so I'll wind it back to the ranch, and then I worked with a fellow named Henry DeLuca, who was born in 1900. When I met him, he was 69 years old, and he didn't have any formal education. just back in those days, he didn't go to school. But what he had was a lifetime of just observing and paying attention to those landscapes. And I learned so much visiting with Henry. I won't go into the stories for the sake of time, but just, I'd learned things at Colorado State University. Then I'd go back to the ranch and I'd bounce some of those things that I was learning off of Henry, and we'd have conversations about what he'd seen. And both ways were valid ways to learn. But that idea that you can only learn in school is certainly not accurate at all, right? And I think those observations, and when you're with someone that really has spent time on a landscape and trying to think about the dynamics of those landscapes and how, in the case of range, wild and domestic animals influence the dynamics and what you see on those landscapes, it becomes, to me, a beautiful thing anyway, and it means that, and I'm not saying if a person isn't interested in that's a negative about that person, but when you're really into the plants and the diversity of different species, and then the animals, from insects and birds and mammals, it's pretty amazing. It's the whole thing's just puts you in awe of it all, I think. So I don't know if that went where you wanted to go, but that's what I think about and then the value of diversity in all of that. I think we started off on that theme, and I love that rap song. I want to share it with some young friends that I know. It's amazing that people would sing about that. But I often think, and soil is what's really the hot topic nowadays, and people are learning a lot about that, and it's important, of course. But I'd like to say plants turn dirt into soil, and diverse mixtures of plants turn soil into homes, grocery stores, and pharmacies, literally, for creatures below and above ground. So it's that diversity of different plant species, I think, that really is critical in the whole deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think from the natural resource professional side, that's why a lot of us got into this business, is because we care and we're very passionate about having as much diversity and functioning ecosystems. What are your thoughts on ways to communicate that to more of the producer end? We have the luxury as professionals of my paycheck doesn't come from the plot of land that I'm on. I don't have that pressure, but farmers and ranchers do. So I guess what experience or what advice do you have for folks to, I don't know, maybe sell biodiversity to agricultural operators?
That's an excellent question. And one of the things that strikes me nowadays is with a growing awareness by people, and I know it's maybe not huge, I don't know how many people, but a growing awareness that our health is linked to what we eat. And several people, I think of Michael Pollan, for instance, writing books for a more general public, that are just saying, that these things matter. I think that creates an opportunity then to think about and to market and to take it from an economic standpoint as well for livestock producers. And this idea then that plant diversity influences the health of soils, but it also influences the health of livestock. If you get into diversity and the value of functional diversity, so many people that I've worked with point out that they don't have to spend money now on antibiotics and treating animals, because the plants themselves are loaded with all these diverse kinds of, quote, phytochemicals, which are compound, not energy, protein, vitamins, and minerals, but these diverse arrays of tannins, terpenes, alkaloids, and on and on and on that plants produce, that in small doses really have health benefits to animals. So it makes their animals healthier, less medication that's needed. But beyond that, what's coming out nowadays is that when animals are eating diets that are phytochemically rich, the quality of meat and milk for human consumption is greatly enhanced. Those compounds get into meat and fat in concentrations that we know if you know, when we're told eat your fruits and vegetables because it'll help you to be healthy. Well, those compounds can get into meat and dairy in concentrations that can be significant for health of human beings. So one can argue that biodiversity isn't just a buzzword that ecologists use and that, you know, it's nice to talk about and it's touchy-feely. It has really functional significance for the health of soil, of livestock, of human beings. And then, you know, depending what's in the mix, it can also have significance for changing climates and emissions. When cattle eat diets that are nutrient rich and diverse and that contain tannins, for instance, tannin containing species, that can reduce emissions of methane and nitrous oxide. So there's a whole bunch of reasons, I think, that we're learning that biodiversity matters for all life on this planet. And I think of that a lot. You know what? We're participating in the sixth mass extinction. That's stunning to think about that. And of course, there've been 5 other ones, and life came back in all diverse forms. So I'm not worried that it's going to disappear. But just life itself and how amazing, from insects, bees, and what they do in systems, just as a for instance, through bacteria and on and on and on. It's true what that rap song said. It matters a lot, and it's affecting our health. And I think livestock producers are in such a key role as they can interface with the public to try to tell that story. I think the general, what is it, less than 2% of the people grow things of, you know, farm and ranch in this country. And yet, and so I think we've become so detached from where our health actually comes from as people in a general public. And I think that's a really nice role that, whether it's NRCS employee or a farmer or a rancher, can be messengers of the importance of that. And I'm thinking of many producers I know and interact with that have really done that and have done really well economically too, by selling, by pointing out and the value of this biodiversity for meat and dairy.
I think you bring up a really good point too, Fred, that's in a sense kind of sombering, but there's also hope in it when we're talking about, you know, looking at the sixth mass extinction. I mean, that's a hard word to even come out of my own mouth right now, you know, to think that we're kind of embarking on that and the fast trends. And, you know, I mean, I'm sold on biodiversity. And I think when we have these kind of heart-to-heart conversations, the people on the land too also, you know, believe in biodiversity. I mean, many of them, it's been in their generations, you know, that land's been in, you know, their generations for multiple times. And so I guess, you know, some of the questions is, you know, is there certain studies that, you know, are really kind of aha moments for you in regards to this biodiversity that, you know, kind of help us maybe shift this direction to a more positive light? But, you know, any of those that really kind of stand out, you know, we have some extremely bright staff within our state that I know are listening in that would, you know, probably really enjoy kind of some of those studies that you could point us to.
Yes, 2 thoughts come to mind, and I hope in my old brain I don't forget the one, because I'll start with your question on biodiversity, but hope. I want to come back to that hope part. You know, and I'm happy to share some of these, send these papers to you too, if people, but there's one I'm thinking of. Let's start with wildlands and rangeland situations. And this long-term studies done in Minnesota, LTER site. And I think they've been going 20 years or more. And they were simply looking at what happens if we have 16 different species growing on these plots versus monoculture. of the species on the plots is what they were highlighting in this particular paper. And they were showing that the nutrient content of the plants in those diverse mixes was much higher in all these different nutrients. They didn't look at the secondary compounds, but I'm sure they would have been quite rich, but showing that they were much higher when plants were growing in diversity as opposed to monoculture. They were also showing that the water holding and carbon fixing capabilities of those diverse mixes was much higher than monoculture. So that's one study that's just been published that comes to my mind, and they're citing other papers. So I'm happy to share that with you, but it just illustrates, you know, and they're talking about the importance of functional diversity, where you have these different plant species. And we know from that work, and there's another paper I'll send you that just came out in Science, just talking about how each species has its unique rhizosphere in the soil that's harboring its own unique combinations of different creatures below ground. And it's when you get all these different species of plants that you create this tremendous diversity of microbial life in the soil below ground. It's really, it's fascinating kind of work. That's just illustrating how important biodiversity is, and the roles of plants. I want to say a word about hope, and what you mentioned on hope. And I saw something the other day. I was reading that hope needs a branch to land on. Hope needs a branch to land on. I thought that was a really neat way to say that. And what hope needs is agency. Agency, to feel empowered, that you can, it can be overwhelming nowadays. Changing climates and all that's playing out related to that, and then mass extinction, as we're talking. And I think so. Not everyone can be a farmer or a rancher. Very few people are, but we can all be kind of farmers and ranchers. That's what I think. If we start to think that our yards, rather than being monocultures of Kentucky bluegrass or whatever that's being planted at great cost, actually, and then we irrigate it in arid landscapes where water is just critical nowadays, and we're knowing more and more how the whole Colorado River system is drying up. And then we fertilize and we mow and all those things that we do, and we put on, of course, herbicides to keep a monoculture, right? We don't want any dandelions. If we would change our consciousness to think about the value of biodiversity and what is it that actually grew here back in the day, that's where, all that NRCS does on those, what species might have grown in this particular environment. And then what if we let our yards go wild and encourage really diverse mixes of different plant species to grow? And if they're the natives, they do that because they live there, right? They survive. Sue and I live on an acre and a half, and I'm not trying to be I don't want to sound like, oh yeah, well, look what we've done. It's not meant that way at all. But so we have this acre and a half. When we came here, the place was nuked, absolutely nuked. There was a little bit of lawn that was around the house that they planted because they wanted to try to sell the place, but everywhere else was. So we thought, well, let's just look at what's growing here. What are the natives? And there were remnants of the natives. And in the places where they weren't, we thought, we're going to just seed there. We're going to seed these natives. And if you were to see the place now, and rangelands, all you people that are on this know rangelands, and you see in the spring, all from the local weed to the larkspur to the cool season grasses and so forth, and then you get into the summer and the warm seasons come on, and then in the fall, it's beautiful. And I can't tell you how many people will be walking by here and they'll just stop and say, what did you do here on it? It's so beautiful. The flax too has really lost, and it's just, I'm trying to pick. It's just all these beautiful plants, and they say, well, come walk around and take a look. And people can't believe it, but we can all be farmers. I was in Colorado this summer, actually, so now I'm going to say, and I saw a lot of places in the Salida area and the Montrose area that have really gone to xeriscaping, but they put tons of rocks in their yards, and I think, boy, the heat load is immense on that, right? The heat load is off the charts. And I think, why not think about native plant species? So that's kind of a pitch that I'm making. But, what if we did change our consciousness to think of that? And then to think there's so many bees in this yard, and we've got a little bit of lawn here. We've kept that, but it's absolutely invaded with clover. And so we don't have to fertilize. It's green as can be because all these clovers are throughout the yard and the honeybees that come here. So I'm not trying to hold us up as some example. I'm just trying to say this is a personal experience of doing some of those things and thinking about the value, and then thinking about hope needs a branch to land on. So what can you do? Well, you can do things in your own yard, and it can cut your costs, and it can be something that we know is contributing to health because, as that rap song said, it's doing functional things in terms of biodiversity. What we got interested in too is planting native species of shrubs, berry producing shrubs. We've got, Sue said, I was counting the other day, we've got over 100 trees that we planted. I said, you're kidding. She said, no, we put these trees and we've got all these shrubs growing around here that produce berries for us, for wildlife species. So and that's fixing carbon. All of that's fixing carbon. And so I think that's such an important thing, that hope, but hope, optimism and hope and those things. I love that. Hope needs a branch to land on. And what can each one of us do in little ways? And then beyond that, it's out of our control, right? But we can do things that make you feel empowered, I think.
Yeah, I'll just throw in, I think you make a great point, Fred, about just kind of doing what you can with what you have. And I've kind of got a similar story. I just live on a 1/4 acre lot in town. And don't come from a farming and ranching background, but have been in natural resources conservation for a long time, so of course I know everything, right? I think when you start doing those little projects like you described on your own piece of ground, even if it is just on a yard, you really can learn more about buying into the system. You have a deeper understanding. So I just have 5 backyard chickens and have a bluegrass lawn in the backyard. And over the last couple of years, I'd always feed them their scratch in the grass. And I noticed, well, I'm starting to get the annual millet that is coming up and reseeding in the lawn. Luckily, my neighbors can't really see into the back too good, so it's been all right. But I've got pollinator plants all around the edge of the lawn, so now I'm getting those plants from the bare areas where the chickens are scratching. I'm getting black-eyed Susan and blanket flower and Maximilian sunflower, and I don't fertilize that yard anymore. I've cut down the watering. And so it's been very interesting just on a tiny little piece of bluegrass to see, wow, I've got annual cool seasons now, and I've got warm season broadleafs, and they're changing the soil. And it's, because, again, I'm, limiting the disturbance. I've integrated livestock, even though they're just, a couple of little backyard chickens. But, it sounds silly, but it's helped me from going from someone that's, seen what other landowners have done and going to workshops to saying, no, I could create this because now I've done it, even on, however many square feet it is. But I think it does provide a deeper understanding of how to make those concepts and how to make the ecology work together. So I'm with you. I'm a believer.
Yeah, what a wonderful example too. We're talking the same thing, absolutely. And I didn't throw in our chickens, but we've got some chickens too. We're not supposed to because the covenants don't allow, but it's a long story. Anyway, and we love to turn them out. We built a palace for them and we turn them out and just to watch them. And we have people who come from the city and quote the city. There's no really big cities here in Montana, but I don't have. And it's funny to me how they like to watch the chickens. They say it's just so cool to go around and watch the chickens chasing grasshoppers or eating this or eating that or whatever they're doing. And we've got 2 ducks. And it's been amazing to me to watch those ducks because the ducks never miss a trick of something that's in the sky. It's stunning. I never realized how tuned into the sky ducks are. And they tilt their head, and and it may be the hardest thing for you to see. It could be a jet that's so tiny you can't see it, or a hawk or whatever it is, but they never miss. And so the chickens watch the ducks, and then if the ducks head for cover, the chickens, and it may sound, well, that's real interesting, but it is amazing. And I've been amazed to see people who come here and they say, can we turn the chickens out and go watch the chickens? And it's neat. Another thing too, not to digress too far, but I see this all the time. So we love to grow. We've always grown gardens, vegetable, herbal, medicinal gardens. Sue got really into medicinal plants. But when you grow your own and on soil and you prick them right, it's amazing to me to see when people come over. And we don't do this deliberately, anything like that. But you have carrots and they say, oh, these carrots are delicious. And it's just illustrating the importance of what we're talking about, of diversity and healthy soils, and then growing good varieties, picking them fresh. Because a lot of what's at the store, honestly, as we all know, it looks great, but it has no flavor whatsoever. And when it has no flavor, you know that the nutritional value isn't there. People are developing, and I appreciate this, machines to try to measure in the store, whether it's good or not. But the best measure you have is your mouth, your palate, your own palate. I was in Costco the other day and I laughed. I watched a lady, we were in the cool room there, and she was trying to lift the top of these red grape thing, because I knew she wanted to sample one of those grapes. And so I just watched her and chuckled, and she finally got in there and got one of those grapes. And then I went up to her and I said, so is it any good? She said, yeah, it tastes really good. And so we both agreed we'd buy those grapes. But it's those broader points that then bring us back to the value of all that we're talking about on diversity. And I'm going to ramble one more thing, but I was in Maryland last week doing a day-long talk, 5-hour talk for a bunch of folks there. And the next night, one of the people wanted me to come and stay at their place. So I did. They grow vineyards and they make their own wine and stuff. And so we went and we were looking at the vineyards and talking about the vineyards. And we got talking about what we're talking about. Well, rather than have nothing under those vineyards or have a monoculture, what happens to the characteristics of the grapes if you have a diverse array of different plant species that are functionally diverse? And so, diversity, I guess we're saying in so many different ways, diversity can influence the chemical characteristics of meat, milk, wine, no doubt, wine as well, all these things and then when there's this richness of flavor, there's evidence that that's good for our health. For instance, when you get these diverse compounds in meat and dairy and in wine, those phytochemicals, they have antioxidant characteristics, immunomodulatory characteristics, anti-inflammatory, all these things that we know are good for our health are in that. And so that, to me, if people understand that and read the literature that's coming out on that, and then studies by David Montgomery and gang just coming out showing that healthy soils produce plants that are richer in phytochemicals, in primary and secondary compounds. So if a person, or NRCS, for instance, or anyone is familiar with that, and then can get that knowledge to the people that they're working with, and then they can convey that to the people that they sell product to. All that is of huge value, I think, ecologically, economically, socially. It's taking that and understanding that message. And I'll share some of the papers that are coming out on these linkages between diversity and quality of products and health of humans. I'll share some of those with you too, that you can share with folks if they're interested in those.
That would be
if you could
great.
send that
'Cause
out. Mhm.
I think the more that we allow ourselves to be the student, I mean, we can read papers, but just kind of like what you talked about, Fred, we need to be students of observing the land and watching, the chickens or, just everything that's around us helps us convey that information to the landowner. And if we're excited about it, it becomes infectious and we're helping them get excited about adopting these changes. And I mean, when we're looking at, some of our current systems, they're easily managed. And, we've gotten into where we look for convenience and ease. We want the microwave meals and the fast foods and the herbicides, one-shot wonders that help make life easier. But we've simplified and made things so much easier that we've taken out all the complexity and the biodiversity and all the things that actually make it great. So, it's sometimes a hard sell, when we're going from, instead of going to McDonald's every night for dinner, you're going to have to cook this really healthy meal, but it's better for you. When we're talking with our people who are managing the land, we're kind of giving them the same talk that we're shifting away from McDonald's and we're going to a more diverse system to help improve the health of the land and the animals and ultimately yourself. And I think the more that we either, incorporate however we can the knowledge within ourselves, even if it's, converting our backyard into a chicken paradise like Noe has, we can make those observations and we can convey that excitement to our, the landowners that we're working with. So I think all those studies and just anything that we can combine, any kind of education, I think helps us in the long run.
Yeah, so many good points that you're making, I think, too. And this idea of students that try to take on that view that we're all students forever. We're all trying to understand these really amazing systems that we, and as Noe said, we all got into this because we liked the natural world. We were interested in that, and trying to maintain that kind of interest and enthusiasm and making it personal, as we've been talking, by doing it in your own place. Um, the value of that's incredible, I think.
Yeah. Fred, do you have any maybe just kind of guiding principles for either land management or animal husbandry that, if operators are following those principles, that the animal health is going to increase? And just kind of some broad scale, like I said, guidelines or principles. I know every piece of ground's a little different when it comes to where the rubber meets the road.
Yes, every piece of ground is different. Absolutely the case. I think, though, if a person can stick with principles and processes, that's what generalizes across landscapes. Wherever you are in the world, principles and processes are still working. And then I like to say, if we can use understanding of principles and processes, then the person who's managing the land, whether it's you with your chickens or us here, or any farmer, they become the artist that paints the canvas, and each one is different. So thinking about how do you want to paint your canvas in ways that work for you. We often get caught up in, well, this is the way things need to be done, and it's easy for that to happen, right? Of this is the way we do things around here, or different movements have that flavor to them, but I resist that kind of thing. I think try to understand principles and processes, and then think about how is it that you want to inflect that, how is it that you want to paint your canvas. And so that is a general sense. I think, from the years I was on the ranch, Henry and I used to talk about from an animal standpoint. What does it mean for an animal to know the range? What does it mean to know the range? Another way to say that would be, what does it mean for animals to be locally adapted to the landscapes they inhabit? And what does that mean ecologically, economically, socially? It's huge what that means, because it means animals aren't machines, genes aren't destiny. You have this tremendous flexibility, genes being expressed in the environment where an animal's conceived, born and raised. Um, Animals being able to do things you would perhaps never expect that they could do, because of that ability to become locally adapted. So without going into that, when I think of the work we did over the years, it really was about that. What's it mean to know the range? What's it mean to be locally adapted? And all this nuance of all what animals are doing and learning. And then I love to show little video segments of animals innovating and adapting. There's one I showed in Maryland where there's this green heron, and I don't know if I showed it, Sylvia, when you were, but it's got this piece of bread. It's at the shore of a lake or something, whatever it is. And it puts the bread out there, and then it grabs it, and it does this, back and forth and back and forth. And then, bam, it catches a fish, and so that fish is going for the bread. It's learned how to use bread to fish. So you think, how on earth did that bird figure that out? That's what used to strike me about livestock as so interesting, whether it was goats, which are great innovators, or sheep or cattle or whatever. They figure things out. And then that can become a part of the culture of the animals. We often talk about our genetics, and the importance of genetics. And certainly genetics is important. But what we need to think about is our epigenetics and our locally adapted animals, our culture. What's the culture of the animals on this landscape? And what have they done? What have they figured out? And what have their bodies figured out that allow them to really become locally adapted? And that's what happens with wildlife species, of course, is that's what they're doing. And because we don't necessarily study them closely, I'm not saying this across the board, but we always come to think, well, it's genetics, it's genetics, it's genetics. I don't think that way at all. I think about how it's epigenetics, how it's learning, how it's adaptation that's ongoing. And in these ever-changing environments, that's constantly moving, evolving. Young animals are starting to learn in the womb and early in life from mother. But then those young animals actually, because they explore things, can bring new behaviors into the group. It's a very interesting, amazing kind of dynamic. So I think in terms of principle and process, whether it's soils or plant behavior is another whole amazing. I was just reading something yesterday about plants and this shaman who's a scientist actually, learning from the plants and then designing experiments from her learning from the plants that are very rigorous scientifically, published in top journals. But her relationship with the plants, plants have 20 different senses. They have nervous systems that it's amazing. And so just coming to appreciate that, for me, that's what science did. I think now a lot about Joni Mitchell's song, Both Sides Now, where she starts off with clouds. I really don't know clouds at all, and then moves to love. I really don't know, and then to life. It brings tears to my, because that's how I think. I don't know a thing about life, but what science did was just to help open up a little bit to the miracle that how amazing, how absolutely amazing plants and animals, and and that gets us to this notion of, and I know that, and end up in conversations about this and talking about this and writing about this of, so what is it that you eat? And there's a big push now that we should all eat plants. That's going to be what really helps save the planet. It's better for human health, better for environmental health. But then there's another side that's pushing back like crazy. No, not necessarily at all, right? That animals can be, and that properly managed animals can be huge benefit for the health of systems, and that meat and dairy are hugely beneficial for human health. And there's a study I like to talk about now, and I never take sides on this. I think each person has to figure out for themselves, what diet every one of us is unique, what works for you. But these studies that do brain scans of vegetarians and show that there's a craving, and I won't go into the details how they do these, there's a craving for meat in many vegetarians. And why? Because there are compounds in meat that plants don't provide in abundance that are really good for our health, for cognitive development, for many, many factors. And so, this idea that we are omnivores, and that there's things that we can get from plants, there's things that we can get from animals. And then where I'm going with this is this idea that plants and animals are conscious. They're absolutely conscious. You could make the argument they're sentient, but the idea that all life is sacred, that's the point to me, is that all life is sacred. And so then how do you treat all life with respect and so forth? I don't even like to, I shouldn't say, no, but I was in Maryland and last week, and I was telling this guy, I don't even like to harm a plant just for the sake of just harming the plant. And he said, I watched something a while back. We were on a field trip and we dug up a plant to look at the root system and stuff. And then it was thrown to the side and we all walked away. And one person went back, took that plant and put it back in the hole and covered the ground around. That to me is, that it's a recognition. It's a recognition. And then we participate. Huh? Whatever you do is bad for something. And we all, to live, thinks it's the irony here of this planet, right? To planet to live, you have to eat something, right? Life lives by consuming itself. And I often tell Sue, I hope that when I die, it's somewhere up in the mountains and I'm not found for a long time so things can just eat me. And that's it. But then we like to tease, probably so toxic, nothing would touch you anyway. So
That's awesome, Fred. And you kind of brought up, a good point. We could, kind of shifting gears a little bit, kind of talking about the animals on the landscape. And, it can become a pretty heated and contentious topic, depending on what side you're on, whether animals are good or animals are bad, or, they should all be pets. We shouldn't be, eating any of them, or if they are on the landscape, they're degrading the landscape. And I mean, it can get heated. We need referees type thing. But, when we're looking at soil health, I mean, we really look at incorporating animals as a big part of, a healthy ecosystem if they're managed right. But we often narrow it down as, animals are good on the landscape or they're bad on the landscape. And then, you've really talked about this whole component of the biodiversity aspect. But when we're talking about animals, those critters on the landscape, how do they fit into this whole biodiversity, and how do they always become such the bad guy too sometimes when we see a degraded system?
Oh my goodness, that takes me back to years ago when I was an undergrad at Colorado State, actually. And, wildlifers didn't like domestic livestock, basically. They were the bad guys, and it was clear why. Well, and it was true back in the, late 18s, early 1900s, when people moved west, didn't appreciate arid landscapes and how easy it is to overgraze those, right? And to cause negative changes. So we knew that. And NRCS, Soil Conservation Service, right? And the universities, range science, all those came into being because people recognized that livestock can harm landscapes. But I think what really gets missed is that they can build landscapes up. It's amazing. That's what we all dedicated and it just like, but I remember teaching I taught a range principles class back in the day for many, many years. And there were kids from across campus had to take that class, which was amazing because you had everything from the hardcore conservation kids and wildlife kids and fisheries to the animal science kids. And that was back in the cattle free by 93 days. So if you remember back then, we got to get rid of all livestock from all rangelands. And those kids would come into class ready to fight. It was amazing. It was from the first day. I don't know if I can convey this, and it may sound like BS, but they were pissed off at each other. They were ready to stick a knife in their. That was the most wonderful teaching opportunity there ever was. It really was. It was incredible because what we did was dialogue, and I loved this, and I moved away from the talking head. I lecture, you take notes, you spit it back to me to a whole other way. But it was about a conversation and setting the stage so that we could have a conversation about all these things. And when those students no longer felt threatened, they felt comfortable that they could speak from their hearts about things why were they so passionate? Because they cared about this stuff, right? They cared. It wasn't that they hated each other, they just thought they hated each other. But when you get in there and everyone have this conversation, it was absolutely stunning. Stunning the knowledge that was in those groups of students, stunning what they would all say and how they would come to appreciate. I remember one, Christy Mack said, you sit there and you listen and you don't even know which side is right anymore. You cannot even know which side is right because you see these beliefs that are coming out. But through the dialogue, then everyone came to an appreciation and a way to move forward too, a way to move forward. It wasn't just so that was, but, and nowadays, it's just stunning to me to see that was more what I would consider on a local level, that all that, within the Western US or where we're grazing, but now it's on a global scale, right? Where that whole, we need to have a dialogue like we had in those classes. We need to have that dialogue. And to realize too, I often think this, whatever you do is bad for something. Whatever you do is bad for something, right? So the best you can do is intend the good, and hope needs a branch to land on, right? That you do the best you can, you try the best you can. And it's an amazing thing, that's for certain. But those days with those students, and the class ended up, it took a lot of years to evolve that class. I failed a lot of times because I was trying to bring in everything from world mythologies to you name it into a quote, right? But it got there the last decade, and there were 4 sections: challenges, opportunities, living in an evolutionary spirit, transcending boundaries. Those were the sections to the class, and we would deal with all the current issues as relates to range, but as relates to, so I'm kind of rambling on, but it's just amazing to see how, and how these one size fits all power kind of plays to me, and the money and power. I have a book here that I think it's The Great Plant-Based Con. Why eating a plant-only diet won't improve your health or save the planet. And I'm not trying to pitch but Jane did a wonderful job. Jane Buxton's over in the UK, and she really did a wonderful job of just trying to talk about that. And there's a chapter in there titled Follow the Money, and you just realize the degree to which big money influences all that goes on in these landscapes, all these industries and so forth and so on. And then you think, and in this article I was reading yesterday talking about agency and how little agency we have because there is so much influence and control by big moneyed interests. But Noe, when you're doing what you're doing in your yard, you're taking some agency, right? And I think when I was growing up in that little town of Salida, all those old generation people, grandparents and they all had huge gardens. They had chickens, they had a pig, and they knew the value of all that stuff. It was amazing to see. During my parents' generation started to go away. Now it's pretty much, I think for the most part, gone away. But to circle back to how profound that can be of an experience, of your personal experience of the environment. And then, if you have to kill something, I'm telling you, that really is a moving deal, right? If you kill a chicken or you butcher a hog or whatever you do, it's it's good for you in some ways, right? It makes you appreciate deeply. Like I say, I don't even like to harm a plant anymore. So I often think I shouldn't be on the planet anymore because I can't even, and I used to, for me growing up, there were only 3 seasons: hunting, fishing, and skiing. And I survived the end of one only because the other one was going. Now I can't shoot things anymore. So anyway, but I'm not saying you just change as you go along, right? So I'm not condemning anyone or anything, but for any of that. But it is a crazy irony of life that to live, you consume, huh? You consume, and then, as you were saying, the value of livestock in these systems, getting away from commercial fertilizers, getting animal impacts, getting manure and urine on those landscapes. So when I was on the ranch, that's all we did. It wasn't enormous scale. About 640 acres on the home place, and a homestead that was 640, the last of the homestead days. But that manure, all when we wintered animals, we moved where we fed them all the time. Why? Get the manure scattered across the pastures, manure in the barns. We hauled out, put it on the meadows. There was no synthetic fertilizer put on that place. It was all animals, and animals as a part of the system. And now we're coming to appreciate how important that is, how with synthetic fertilizer, you break linkages between plants, plant root systems, and the life in the soil, right? That's powerful in and of itself. You get plants addicted to synthetic fertilizer rather than the real thing. And those linkages that give us insights into the workings of nature and how natural systems really, if you want to use a model, they're probably it, right? Trying to understand natural systems and how they work, and then thinking about how can we mimic those systems. And that being a message that goes out. That's where knowledge of people in NRCS, I think that knowledge, and then being able to convey that in a way that's not like some talking head or I'm the big know-it-all, but just out of passion and being able to convey that to people is such an important role that you play, that you folks play. And I've mentioned to you, Sylvia, when I was on the ranch, I loved when NRCS folks used to come out. Their technical knowledge and the conversations that I could have with those folks, especially after I'd finished at Colorado State University and had decided I wouldn't go back to school anymore, that I had enough school for a lifetime. And then I got out running that ranch and realizing how much I was missing. When an NRCS person would come out, boy, I would just talk their ears off because you could talk about these kind of things, huh? And that knowledge of soils and plants and on and on and on was really great.
Yeah, I think you know, with the state of NRCS today, we spend a lot of times on contracts and just getting money out the doors and really, doing kind of small one-off projects with landowners. But hopefully over the course of all of our careers in the agency, we'll see kind of the shift back to more educating and empowering landowners. I think sometimes we lose sight of that. We think that landowners should be coming to us for everything, whether it's, technical assistance, which if we have, we want to offer, but money, and really I see more of our, the niche that we can fulfill is supporting landowners, financially with projects where we can, but helping that knowledge transfer and helping kind of light that fire so that they can go educate themselves. Like, they shouldn't just come to USDA. They should be going to, the producers in their area that are doing progressive grazing or farming, and going to workshops and talking to folks across the country, or getting on Facebook and talking to the regenerative ag people in Australia, and really, again, exercising that agency over their own operations, and hopefully, within USDA, we're not threatened by that. But that's something that we want to foster and encourage. So then the next time we're out on those properties with those landowners, they can teach us something that we don't know. And then that makes us better, stewards of that knowledge for the next landowner that we're going to work with.
I can really relate to everything you're saying, and I would venture that the kind of relationship that you can build with a landowner is much, much richer when you can be out there on the ground, all students sharing knowledge and working together toward shared goals, toward what that producer is trying to do, compared to if you're just handing out, quote handing out money. I think it's such a rich relationship for you and for the producer, for in both ways, how those relationships that you can build with you and the people and the landscapes. Wonderful thing, wonderful thing.
It really is the best part of our job. And I think just kind of hearing that message too from you, Fred, just reminds us of that importance. We kind of get bogged down with some of the details, but, hearing that, I think helps us, maybe it's a rally, a pep talk, get us, enthused again, because we really do have that ability for that mutualistic exchange of our knowledge with their knowledge. I mean, my best teachers have been the people on the land. So yeah, I think it's inspiring. So thank you for
and if you
echoing
enter
that
into
message.
it as we're all students, we're all students trying to learn, trying to do the best we can with what we know. Then it makes open hearts, and open minds to try to create, to try to work together to create, to paint the canvas, and to paint the canvas for each person as unique for that person and that landscape and that time and place. I think that's a wonderful thing.
All right. Well, Sylvia, did you want to go to the I like your movie trailer question?
Yeah. This
is a brilliant one.
We've kind of highlighted, and we've got, we can do some more recapping too, but we also want to make sure that we're, allowing some time for some questions and answers. But, obviously, Fred, you've gotten to live a very diverse, we're talking about biodiversity, but you've gotten to live a very diverse life. And if a producer from Hollywood came and said, we want to make a movie about your life, Fred, what actor are you gonna hope plays you in that movie?
When I saw that question, it was really kind of made me blush, because you don't like to talk about that stuff. But I did think some thoughts. I thought,
Okay.
the movie to me would need to be about relationships. It would need to be about relationships, our relationships with landscapes. That means all the creatures out there, as we've been talking, and the humans. I think it would need to be about relationships. I don't know who I would think to be an actor, but I know who I would want to direct and produce that movie, and it would be Robert Redford. And the reason, I think of movies like the Milagro Beanfield War, and A River Runs Through It. And I think he really gets that. I think he gets those relationships, the importance of community, not just the people part, certainly the people, a critical part, that as Milagro is playing out everywhere nowadays. But I think he really gets that, and relationship with the natural world. So I don't know who I would think to be to be an actor, but I know I would want Robert Redford. Robert Redford to be the director and the producer, just seeing what he's done historically with those kind of themes.
Well, I did in the chat ask people for their suggestions, so we'll get some input from our audience who they think.
Yeah, I'm
see the
afraid
movie.
to listen to that. I hope they're as funny as can be, actually. You
We
know,
got
there's a guy in Milagro Beanfield named Amarante. Do you remember Amarante, that old guy
Yeah.
that's in the movie? I think he's just absolutely fantastic. What he's doing physically and spiritually, both. The message that they're conveying through old Amarante. And you know, when I saw who played that, and I don't even remember his name, he's not an old ancient guy. It's like, wow, that's amazing that they were able to make him to look that old and that he was able to act that old too. So maybe somebody like that. I'm getting old now, so
Well,
old guy that sits around and talks to angels in the day because they're the only one got time to talk. I loved it, you know. And then you make a meal for prayers and stuff. I loved it.
love it. Well, some of your suggestions for actors were John Malkovich, Kristen Bale, Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins, Woody Harrelson. So, yeah, I think a good diverse bunch. They could mix them together. But you know, we've got some other. Robert De Niro. Yep, I agree on that one. Might have to get this turn, but we want to, before we leave, today, we do want to kind of get your parting messages. But these were some questions that we had for you that you didn't get to see, because these are our would you rathers. So the first question, and then I'll have Noe ask the second one, and these ones are kind of quick responses. Would you rather have a biodiverse system that's absent of people, or a degraded system with people who are passionate about introducing biodiversity into the system?
Degraded system with people passionate. Yeah. Yeah, we're part of the picture here, huh? For better or worse. Yeah, I think that's what I would want.
They were definitely part of the system.
Mhm. All right, so next one. Would you rather have sheep or cattle on the range? And you can't say both.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Goats.
Goats. Went off script.
Chickens.
That is really a hard question, because I see value in all of them. Mixed species grazing too. Yeah, that's a mind twister for me, that one there.
Well, and we were just talking about biodiversity, so that's not a fair question, because in all honesty, we need all animals in the system functioning. But the next one is would you rather spend a week in an alpine system or a riparian ecosystem?
I should probably spend it in a riparian system, but I love alpine. My heart has never left those high mountains, those lakes, those streams. Yeah, so I would, and spent a lot of time last summer in the Swatch Range, hiking, climbing Mount Chavanaugh in the San Juans. Just absolutely say, in the orbits I have left, that's where I want to spend my time, is up there.
All right. Well, the last one, and we're not biased at all here, but would you rather be in Colorado or Montana?
Colorado. And it's nothing against Montana, obviously, is an incredible state. But I think we get wed to the places where we're conceived, born, and raised through these molecules of emotion. And my heart just has never left Colorado. It will never. And I did a lot of programs during the pandemic where Native Americans were there, and they would always start with where they came from. And I very much appreciate it. I'm Fred from that link to place, huh? That link to place, and how powerful that is for us, I think, is really, really meaningful. And when you
Well, you
lose that,
talked
I
about,
don't know what you have. I tell one quick story here. There's only one place I've worked. Worked as a technician for a lot of years and did a lot of NRCS kind of work, not for NRCS, but at Utah State. There's a place in Utah. I shouldn't say the name of it, but there's a place where we had long-term projects going, and it was a huge area, 12 miles, cattle grazing, a lot of stuff, everything from watershed. In fact, people were using, Fred Gifford was raining on soils in those days and looking at runoff way before anybody started doing that. All kinds of work. But so this valley, I never did like it though. It was windy, it was dry. I never liked that valley. And there's a psychologist I met, and we were talking one time, and he came from Utah, and I didn't know where. And he started just raving about this valley. Oh, there's nothing he didn't love about this particular Tintic Valley, it's called. And finally I said, John, where are you from? Tintic Valley. I said, oh my God, explains it all. That's the only way you could love that place so much, you know? Yeah, so that wasn't a fair question, but for sure it's Colorado.
yeah, you talked about livestock being adapted to a place, and I think people to an extent are as well.
Yes, yes. And when you get moved to a new environment, our daughter, Jess, lived in LA for many years, and she's a barber, loves doing barbering. And during the pandemic, it shut down in LA. All that shut down. And so she came back. We said, well, come back here, come stay with us, you know, and so forth. And so she did. And then she ended up going back and forth between the two. And then she finally ended up here in Bozeman. And it was very hard, very, very hard transition from where she knew and loved and so forth. And the first year was horrible. Next year better. Last summer, when she's starting in the third year, we were floating down the river in inner tubes, actually. We got down to the, and she told her brother and I, she said, you know, guys, I think Montana's starting to grow on me. And now this winter, she's in the third year. And I mentioned that when we were working with livestock and we moved them to totally unfamiliar environments or there was a 3-year adaptation trough. The first year, the performance was the worst. The next year, a little better. The next year, better. And I've often thought that for humans too, you know, there's this total adaptation that we have to go through. And it used to amaze me. We were doing a lot of studies of that. And then we started working with producers like Ray Bannister in eastern Montana and Bob Budd over at Red Canyon Ranch, where they were totally changing food and habitat selection behaviors of their herds. And we'd ask them, well, how long did it take? This about 3 years. It took us about 3 years to get, you know, so I think of that trough in relation to people, and I think Jess is in that third year now, and she's pretty happy, and I'm looking forward to going skiing with her tomorrow, actually.
You know, and Fred, that just, you know, that brings up a great point. You know, we've been talking about biodiversity, and we've been talking about how do we work with the people on the land and the plants and the animals. And, you know, we do want to see kind of quick things. We've got quick deadlines, and we've got to get these contracts written and these practices done within 12 months. But what we take out is that equation is that adaptation to these changes. And change is scary, regardless, you know, if it's changing a job or a location or changing our whole management system. And we're in the natural resource field. We don't talk about emotions and feelings and psychology, but that all plays a big role into a much bigger scheme of this whole incorporating biodiversity. And I think, you know, you really highlighted again on that relationship. And when we feel safe with somebody and we feel comfortable with someone, we're more willing to kind of take on those new risks and challenges. And so I think it's kind of a really amazing message that you kind of, you know, weaved into this talk. And I hope that many that are on the line hear that and kind of take it with them. And I guess before we open up question and answers, just kind of some of your parting wisdom, things that you would really like to kind of share to I mean, we've got an amazing group of people in our state. I mean, we're biased, it's Colorado, but you know, we've got amazing staff here that are so passionate and they're excited about making changes. And so what would be kind of your parting wisdom? And then we'll ask those that are wanting to ask a question, just go ahead and drop those in the chat and we'll spend the last part in question and answer. But turn it
Well, I
over
want to
you, Fred.
reinforce a point that you made. I have no doubt that you have amazing people that are working with NRCS. And I say that not just in a flippant way, but that short course that we taught for 25 years, that was amazing to me. And to see the people and to come to appreciate the knowledge and passion that the NRCS folks had, it was absolutely a highlight. And when, as I was telling you the other day, when I started out, I was like, well, this is one more thing to do, you know, add this on top of the, but boy, it was clear from the beginning how profound that would be and what a moving experience it was for me. So I just want to reinforce that point that I have no doubt and how much I loved working for NRCS. I don't know. I think we've captured so much as we've gone about along. I think for me, it's about relationships with one another. I know, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s, I had 5 years of horrible depression. Had to look up to see a worm, and won't go into all that's its own story. But during that, my family and I moved to Australia, and we lived there for a year. It was a wonderful, wonderful year, still in deep depression. But when I got to Australia and was thinking, we were getting a lot of accolades for the research that we were doing. It was new, it was innovative. People had thought about the creatures in that way. But when I got to Australia, all I could think about was what was neat about it was the people. That's what I missed. I missed all those people I was working with. And I thought, you know, the creativity that's flowing is coming from our hearts and minds, from loving relationships with one another. That was the beginning and the end of it. It created that safe space for us to just for creativity to occur. So that to me is really, and you know, if we get too busy in what we're doing, to forget about that, then the life, I think, goes out of it. I think and it's easy to become machine-like. And who wants to become a machine? We don't. None of us like that, right? What we want is these loving relationships that nurture one another, and especially nowadays, as crazy as the world is, right? That's another hope needs a branch to land on. Those kind of things are really, they keep you going. And relationships, any of them take time, right? You know, if you've been married, it's they're challenging. They take time, they take commitment, and but that's where the good stuff is. I think absolutely for me, looking back on it all, that's still what's nice. That's why I like to be here with you, with you folks, because that's what's worthwhile to me in all of this kind of thing.
Well, Fred, that was perfectly said. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks to you gals. You're creating the opportunity for all of this, right? For a conversation from the heart, huh?
Exactly.
And so if anyone on the line has any questions, you're welcome to put those in the chat. And we've got a couple of minutes left that we can take your questions before we let Fred go for the day.
Go out and do some more cross-country skiing with Henry and Sue. Henry's our black lab.
Fun. You had another, just, you know, in case you ever do get a movie deal, Robert Duvall was another, and Matthew McConaughey. So just in case you need some actor suggestions.
That's funny. I want to see that old man from Milagro.
I have one question. What are your most favorite native plants in northern Colorado?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I hardly met a plant that I haven't come to appreciate. Um, when I was a sophomore in college, so I'd never really seen a plant before then. My mom had beautiful flower gardens and stuff, but I have to say, until I took taxonomy that sophomore year, I'd never seen a plant. But after taking that class and doing the collection, I just absolutely fell in love with plants. Um, and when I went, so Harrington's book was the one. Do you remember Harrington's Key to the Plants of Colorado? I don't know what the
Yep.
key is now. It's a wonder I can remember that. But I always wished I could have met that man. And but when I went to Utah State University, there was an old one named Art Holmgren, and boy, I beat a path there so fast to his door. My wife and I had made a herbarium of 500 plants by then, and they were works of art. We didn't just slap them on the sheet. We would make beautiful, and if there were different colored, sometimes you find one that's not the color for the species, and you put it on there too. So I loved them all, but when I got over there, I would say I hadn't appreciated the grasses yet. They're complex, they're diverse. So I took a class from him in agristology, and that whole world opened up to me too. All those grasses and how incredible they are as well. So I'm squirming around that question and going to say I just have found all the plants so beautiful. And when that reading that article and that scientist slash shaman says the plants, those people that really get into herbal medicine with people, they say the plants talk to them, the plants tell them, they call out. And I can believe that you get into it deeply enough. And I think that happens with the animals, which is what I was more studying, self-medication and the use of plants by animals. But that whole world of plants and the beauty of plants and the roles they play in our relationship, I still find them amazing. The thing I find a little bit sad nowadays, if you don't work with plants all the time, they slip away from you.
They do.
And now I'll be out and going on landscapes, and I think I know you, but I can't pull up your name anymore. Maybe, when an animal's out there foraging, I doubt it has a name for each of the plants, but they know them all, so maybe it doesn't matter so much.
I used to work
As
with
we
the
get
rain.
older, all those details don't matter until pretty soon, because you
I
can get bogged down in the details too, right? And sometimes you let all those details go and you just open up to the mystery and wonder and beauty, um, and realize how little you probably know, but that's okay. But that's okay, huh? You
it
just
is.
it's an appreciation that you've developed over time. When I retired from Utah State University and we moved back to the backwoods of Colorado, 12 miles in on graveled road, and if we didn't have kids here in Montana, we'd still be there, gals. We'd still be there. Sue and I would look at each other and say, "This is a stolen moment," and we thought it was until we died up there, until we grew old and died. We didn't realize that our kids would talk us into moving up here to Montana, but it was amazing period to be there and to be in that backwoods, and yeah. And then what I was going to say, I was losing my train of thought. But when we moved back there, I thought, I'm not going to study anything anymore. I don't care about study. It takes so much effort. I just want to be like when I was a little kid, just there, looking at all of it and thinking how amazing and how beautiful it is. And the animals too. Oh, all those different creatures that were living up there was amazing. No place like Colorado, right?
Right. We do.
Mhm.
We have one question about if you're going to be giving any workshops or presentations here in Colorado in 2023.
Nothing's on the agenda. I usually do get invited to one thing or another. Um, including by you, Sylvia. I'm not big. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not trying to look for, but I don't have. I don't have anything right now. I do have a few things on the agenda, but nothing in Colorado. I do have plans to go back there and do more hiking, though, guaranteed. I'm going to be back there hiking and going to be there in February skiing.
And I feel that it's important to share this comment from Alex in Fort Collins. She said, I feel like we just listened to our future selves, but with so much more gained wisdom. So thank you for your passionate words and your storytelling. You're a beautiful soul.
Yeah, you're going to make me cry. You know, and I think too, of what who is any one of us, and this gets to that more spiritual part of what we are. But you know, you end up being a certain thing, but all these different things that influence you, right? So who is this thing you call you? I don't even look at me as me, if that makes sense. You know, you don't. Yeah, and there's this consciousness that's really animates, I think, all life, and that's what we are. But it's wonderful to spend time. That's what I think. You know, I love to do that like this, of just interacting. And what I love even better, and it's nice that you two have been interacting. Those classes that I mentioned where I was no longer the talking head. It was just dialogue, and we'd shape it up in a way so that there would be materials that we would be covering. It wasn't just go in and BS. And I would call on people. So, okay, Sylvia, you want to get us started on discussion today of such and such and so and so. So they'd come in totally prepared. You know, I mean, because they never knew when they would get called on. And then it would just free range. And it was just stunning. And after I did that, I realized that I could never go back to being the talking head. It's so arrogant in a way when there's so, and you think, well, they're just quote kids, you know, just a bunch of kids, but there's a wisdom and a knowledge, and I would just think I could never do that again. It has to be that. My job I saw is setting the context so that everyone could speak from their heart, would not feel, and that we would have that dialogue. So I'm talking a lot here, you know, people just rambling on because
Well,
that's
that's
I
why
think
we
the
invited you, Fred. We wanted
yes,
you to talk.
that's
So
the
it's okay.
that's the format. And I love it. But you take what I'm saying, huh? That point yeah, of that broader point. So of not really taking much. Yeah.
We have another comment just thanking you, loving your spirit and your thoughtfulness, refreshing and appreciated. And I think that echoes what we're all feeling. And I think again, as we are, closing here with just a few minutes left, that, you really kind of helped bring it back home what this is all about. It's much bigger than us, going out and getting contracts. I mean, on the whole scheme of thing, it's much bigger, it's much deeper, and we have the ability to impact not only the landscape and the animals and the people that we work with, but we're all interconnected and we're connected together, and to remember that connections, as we go about our day. And, Noe, I always appreciate getting to do these with Noe, but some of your parting thoughts, Noe, and comments.
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking that this everything's just kind of lining up really well. And Fred, I think the conversation today has just been, just so wonderful and motivating for everyone. And Sylvia and I are just lining out our next couple of speakers, but our next podcast is going to be with Daniel Palick, and we're really going to focus on emotional intelligence and how do we relate to one another and relate to landowners, and how do we open up each other's hearts, and how do we show those vulnerabilities and build those relationships. So it just occurred to me, I'm like, oh, well, Fred just set this beautiful context, and then in the next one, we'll really get into kind of the nitty gritty of how do we build our own emotional intelligence to enhance those relationships. And so that was just kind of for those out there spoiler on what we'll be covering next time, but I just appreciate that, you know, we've now had a series of speakers that I think have just so beautifully described that at the end of the day, this is about relationships with the land, with the landowners, and with each other. And if we're tending to those things first, then the conservation will result.
Yeah, absolutely the case, huh? All that'll flow from those. That's wonderful that you're going to have that. Yeah, emotional intelligence, so important, huh? So critical. There's a book I like to read now. I think about this a lot, this whole idea of enlightenment and what that is. And you know, there's all different religions of the world, right? All the different religions. I see those as the cultural inflections, and very important as cultural inflections. But the elementary idea is this relationship with being, huh? Or God, or that we are that, basically. And I think of William James' book, The Variety of Religious Experience. And he talks about all these variety, and he ends up, you know, enlightenment is ultimately it, where what we realize is that we are that. We're not separate from. It's a beautiful thing. And Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, he talks so much about that. And I think, and I know it's time to break it up, but I think of what happened to me back in 1999 when I had cancer and was in the hospital after surgery at this time, exactly this time of year, and how what he describes happened to him that night of when all the mentalistic stuff shut down, all the noise shut down, and he woke up enlightened. And the words he uses in that first part of that book describe what happened to me better than anything I've ever read, where you're overcome with this feeling that you are absolutely one with God or being or transcendent, whatever you want to say, that you, and it can't be put into words. If you have to wonder, have I had that? You haven't. But if it happens, it's so overwhelming. You just know, and you know all fear goes away because you know there's nothing ever. You're that, huh? Name and form goes away. Fred's going to be good. You know, you're getting older. There goes the fender. There goes the tire. There goes the. But if you identify with the consciousness that's one with that, you let the whole dang thing go because you know that, and that what overtakes you is that's it. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing. So anyway, it's all I think about anymore. Actually, is those kinds of things. Mainly yep.
Well, and it's at the end of the day, that's what matters. You know, I think as we all go through our life, you know, it's easy to focus on what we're doing at work, and we're doing this at work. We're getting paid to get to listen to you, but it feels like it doesn't feel right today. This is quite the gift. And I think you know, we do need to humbly kind of remember at the end of the day, the world keeps spinning, and our part on here, whether and how we choose to make our influences is it's much greater than getting those contracts done. It's much greater than did we get those practices done. And I just want everybody to kind of take that deep breath and to realize that, you know, we are at a greater purpose here, and to just kind of let this sit with you today. And
I have to
and
make
just
one more comment, Sylvia.
please do, please do.
We'll talk so much about unconsciousness that most people go through life unconscious. And so we're responding to what's going on in the physical world all the time, and different levels of unconsciousness. But until we wake up to who we really are, and then he talks about how important that is in terms of every facet of life, of course, but in terms of creativity and some of the topics that we touched on, that's where creativity ultimately comes from. It's not, it's really, yeah, and then it becomes the transcendent. Yeah, it's anyway. I will let it go, but it's just wonderful to spend time with you. Absolutely, for me, and with all the folks. It would have been fun to see each of their faces and to
Hopefully we can find a reason to maybe get you down here and at one of our workshops and be able to do this in person in the not too distant
yeah,
future.
those are the fun things. And Sylvia, we've gotten together more than once. I just so appreciate the programs, what you gals are trying to do. Oh, I know where I was going to wind with that emotional intelligence. I mean, that's it. I mean, you have to become conscious. The more conscious you become, the more you wake up. And he really nails that in the book. And then, of course, the whole idea of the book is what do you have to do to wake up? How do people wake up? And for him, and when he says it was for me, I never had any intention of what happened in that hospital. There was no intention at all. What happened was, as he says, a total surrender. You just find, I was so relieved to go into the hospital. I was running so fast at work, at my work, going 50 things at once, and just so relieved. You surrender, you total surrender, and then the whole thing opens up to you. So anyway.
Awesome. And we do have before we close with you, Fred, I just want to make sure, because I don't know if you can see the chat, but Rachel just said she took your class 15 years ago. It was revolutionary. And she just, thanks for introducing again to a Colorado younger generation of NRCS planners. Your lessons run deep for all of us at every level as we move within our careers. She needed this beautiful lesson today to set our intentions and direction, and she thanks us all for our part today. And then Allison just wanted to thank you for sharing your stories and your thoughts. It's been inspiration and much appreciated. And so again, Fred, as always, thank you. This is
well, and thanks to all of you too. And that's all. And really wish you a peaceful and really blessed holiday season. Chance to maybe step back and quiet the mind and get peaceful, and enjoy. Hope needs.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, again, Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us. And it sounds like the snow is great and you're gonna go get some skiing in, but this has been really valuable. I know for myself and from these comments for the folks that are listening. So just thank you so much for your time.
Okay, and same to you. Thank you all, and have a peaceful and blessed holiday season.
You as well, Fred. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Okay, gals. Love to all of you.
Thank you. You too, Fred.